That's true. Naked Palpatine.
Oh, you pick that one. Fresh out of the clone tank, nude Palpatine is my
Well, that's the first thing I think of when you say Dark Empire Palpatine. Hello, everybody. Now, I recently finished the Dune trilogy that I was reading, so I'm getting back into Star Wars, but I didn't have enough time to finish it to get a review out for you by Thursday. So, with that, I thought about what's another thing I could talk about. This be a little bit of a shorter one, but I thought, hey, connections between George Lucas and the expanding universe, and just some things that George Lucas was involved in. Because, I think it's always good to recognize some of the stuff that has crossed over with George Lucas's stuff and what he's approved and whatnot. So I think it'd be interesting just to address it. I mean, many other people have. Matt Wilkins has. Christopher Nelson has. Many other people online have. But I thought I'd just put it out there for my video. The more the knowledge is out there, the better. So one of the interesting things is, if you are a fan of the prequels, is that the city planet that we get to see in all three films, Coruscant, was not created by George Lucas. Coruscant originates from the 1990s novel Heir to the Empire by Timothy Zahn, which was at the time the advertised as the episodes 7, 8, and 9. Well, the two books following it anyway, but it was advertised on the cover as the official sequel to the films. But the city featured in that book is Coruscant, and it was Timothy Zahn who created that. And so in all three films, we get to see Coruscant. There you go. Another cool one, as we stick with the prequels real quick, is Darth Maul's double-bladed lightsaber. That was not a George Lucas idea. In fact, it came from the expanded universe. In the Tales of the Jedi comics, written by Tom Veitch, we have Exar Kun, an ancient Sith Lord who wielded a double-bladed lightsaber. Now, we know for a fact that George Lucas read the comics, and he liked the idea so much that he included it in Episode 1 with Darth Maul having a double-bladed lightsaber. The EU would later, make everything connect and fit and make it be so that Darth Maul actually read the ancient Sith teachings and Sith history and whatnot, and purposely designed his double-bladed lightsaber after Exar Kun's. Or at least he wanted to do the same sort of combat style that Exar Kun did. So that's interesting. Another thing with the prequels, now, this guy originates from the films, but he wasn't really a character. He was just in the background. In Episode 1, on Tatooine, in a single frame, you could see a dude just chilling over by, I think Anakin is messing with, or saving Jar Jar from Zabulba, or somewhere around those scenes, in little marketplaces. And in one of the shots, there's a guy simply sitting down. It's a guy with a weird yellow thing around his forehead. Nothing really about that. He doesn't show up again. He is nothing. He's just a background character, but he becomes a character in the expanding universe because the expanding universe decided to evolve upon him, and that is, of course, Quinlan Vos. Now, that wouldn't really be a connection. That would be the EU just taking something from the movies and fleshing it out, which is something the EU did. That was wonderful. But it is still taken from the EU because in Episode 3, we get a one-sentence mention of some sort of mission going on. That mission you can read about in the comics. And I might be incorrect about this, but if I remember correctly, those comics were released prior to the film, which is why when they mention that mission that's going on with Quinlan Vos or whatever, it's a reference to the comics. There you go. Another thing that is pulled straight from the comics is Aayla Secura. Because Aayla Secura, while Quinlan Vos may have originated from the films, Aayla Secura did not. Aayla Secura was introduced in the Quinlan Vos comic books. And then she was introduced in Episode 2 because she came and fought, during the Battle of Geonosis. and we would see the end of her life in episode 3. So there you go, a comic book character from the EU, which was never canon, and George Lucas threw her into the films. To a lesser extent, we have, the Droids TV show with the big wheel thing. That would later be implemented to be, well, here's an earlier version of that in episode 3, because of course Droids takes place after episode 3. But, so that was a cool connection as well. And there's many other things like that. Some other things George Lucas did, this is a famous and big one, is that George Lucas was making his prequels, and at the time, the expanded universe was diving into the New Jedi Order, which was this epic 19-book series where multiple storylines from the past converge together to form this gigantic galactic event. Similar to what, Avengers Endgame or Avengers Infinity War did, but I think even on a larger scale than that. Because it affects every single one of those characters. Now, only disappointment about that is the EU hasn't really continued. If the EU has continued, we can kind of like build upon all that stuff and whatnot, but, it's over. So there's some characters that we just don't get enough time with. But that's a little sidetracking. But the famous thing is that Anakin Skywalker was the main character of the prequels. And for some reason, this is a similar thing that happened with the Gotham TV show. Because in the Gotham TV show, this is relevant, they had access to multiple Batman villains, but the one Batman villain they weren't allowed to use was the Joker. Because the Joker, apparently people thought, the executives on top thought that the normal fans would be too stupid to differentiate Joker from the movies and Joker on this TV show. So Joker was never allowed to be used, technically. They worked their way around it, though, with a character named Jerome, who, while never wearing makeup, never calling himself the Joker, was, for all intents and purposes, that show's Joker. And then they killed him off. And then we got Jeremiah, his twin brother, who would be skirting the lines, allowed to actually wear makeup and everything, but still never called himself Joker. Even by the end of the show, he only goes by Mr. J, so teetering on the line of breaking their contract, but just skimping by enough to get away with it. It's a bit harder with what George Lucas had asked Lucasfilm to do. He didn't ask specifically for this to happen, but George Lucas was like, you need to write out Anakin somehow. Anakin Solo, the youngest child of Leia and Han, because I don't want people getting confused about Anakin Solo and Anakin Skywalker. Funny enough, if you read Junior Jedi Knights, I think it actually does make that mistake. There's a typing error where it says Anakin Skywalker instead of Anakin Solo, which is kind of funny. But regardless, they made some creative decisions in New Jedi Order, which led to a vastly different shift moving forward in NGO, especially with Jason's character, who was originally slated to just die off. But they did some things with it to make it really interesting and compelling. But that is something that George Lucas directly gave them a command that they must do, which is another point in favor to the EU being canon, because it's a weird thing of, well, who cares? It's fan fiction, right? It was never canon, so who cares, right? But here's another example of this. If the EU was never canon, if it was never considered canon, then why was the EU never allowed to make a Yoda backstory? If it's not true, if it's not a part of the canon, then it could say whatever it wants about Star Wars and it wouldn't matter because it's not canon. But George Lucas forbade diving into Yoda's past. You weren't allowed to do it, and that never changed. Why? Because the EU was canon. But there's that and many other things I could probably bring up and address, but those are just some examples of the things that George Lucas was either directly involved in or things he took inspiration from, just to show that, the EU has always kind of been interconnected with the films. More so during the prequels, but it's always been a case of well, I mean, the movies, the original trilogy came out, and then, we had the Marvel Comics, we had the Ewoks and Droid show, but that's about it. But the 90s moving forward, the EU, it was inspirational, even to George. I mean, George may have not cared about it a lot, it really doesn't matter. What we do know, though, is he took a lot of inspiration. Aayla Secura, Coruscant, double-bladed lightsabers. Like, he allowed it to influence him. So I don't think we can forget about that. I don't know if I kind of went off the point of this video. I don't think I did. I think I stayed on point. But regardless, that's pretty much it, guys. Just thought I'd let you... most of you who watch my channel know this already, but I thought, why not? Just to have something to tide you over till I get my next book review out. But for those of you who didn't know, yes, in fact, that is how involved things were, and it is definitely something that was canon. If not to George's heart, to his company, absolutely. So, yeah, it is fascinating, the things that connect and everything. The fact that when I found out that Aayla Secura was in the comics first, it blew my mind. And, it enhances everything. The EU is so complementary to the movies. Do you need the EU to, enjoy the movies? No, that's a problem that Halo has when 343 took over, which is a studio company. Because in Halo 5, you basically, if you weren't reading the expanded universe, you were going to be really confused, which is a problem because you shouldn't have to do that. It should complement your game, but you shouldn't need it. But that's not what the Star Wars movies did. You have the 6 films, and that's all you need. You could get by just on that. But if you wanted to flesh out that story, if you wanted to, deep dive and have it fit and work and complement and make more sense, the EU is there just in your grasp. So, if you haven't gotten into the EU, you should, because you've already seen a bit of the EU in the films. Again, Aayla Secura, Coruscant, the double-bladed lightsaber. If you have not gotten into the expanded universe yet, please, I humbly ask you to try to get into it. Some places start, the Thrawn trilogy, the Darth Bane trilogy, Jedi Apprentice, the young adult series. Those would be places I recommend, or even the KOTOR comics, if you have ever played the KOTOR games. But that is where I'll leave that here for today. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. Sharing helps a ton. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, may the Force